He bought her for the price of a broken saddle and half a bottle of whiskey, traded from a drunk who called her useless because she couldn't speak, couldn't hear. The rancher didn't ask questions. He needed silence more than answers. But that girl, she watched storms like they whispered to her, carved birds that never flew, and knew when danger was coming before the coyotes howled. Then one night, with blood on the wind and men riding hard, she turned to him and spoke. Not with words, but with something far older. That's when he realized. She'd been listening the whole time. The prairie stretched, brittle and endless, under a sky the color of faded denim. A dry wind stirred dust from the bones of a long-dead fence, whistling through broken boards like a ghost still trying to speak. At the edge of this silence sat a man whose name the townsfolk seldom used, just the rancher, as if no other word could hold what he'd once been and refused to become again. He sat on his porch as the light died, the bottle of rye untouched beside his boots, its amber eye catching the last of the sun. His face, all shadow and scars, watched the trail like a dog watches a door that never opens anymore. The land didn't speak back. Neither did he. He didn't go into town often. When he did, he kept to the outskirts, supplies, nails, tobacco. That day was different. Not because of what he needed, but because of what he hadn't expected to find. It happened outside the saloon. A fight spilled into the street, loud and stupid. Two men brawled over cards, or women, or just the taste of blood. No one paid them much mind. But behind them, half-dragged like a sack of oats, was a girl. No shoes, hair in mats, dress torn at the shoulder. Maybe 10, maybe younger. Eyes blank, but too still. The kind of still that meant she'd already figured out how to disappear while staying in place. The drunk who held her by the wrist slurred something about her being broken. Can't talk. Don't hear neither. Damned ghost just stares. Someone laughed. Someone else muttered it was a shame. The rancher stepped forward, slow and deliberate. He didn't look at the girl. He looked at the drunk. How much? The words landed like gravel. The drunk blinked. What? You want to sell her? I'm buying. Hell, man, I was just. A coin pouch hit the dirt. The weight of it turned heads. The rancher said nothing more. Just stared. The drunk hesitated, then shoved the girl toward him like she might bite. He scooped up the coins and vanished back into the noise. The girl didn't flinch, didn't cry, just stood there in the dust, silent as stone. She didn't look at the rancher until he turned away. He didn't touch her. He just walked. She followed, bare feet quiet on the hardpack road. Back at the ranch, he showed her the spare room. Small, clean enough. A cot, a blanket, a tin cup on a crate. He pointed to the bed, then to the basin. She watched, never blinking, never asking. He left her there and went to fix the south fence, try not to think about the shape of her eyes. Nights came early out there. With no words between them, she stayed quiet by the fire. He handed her bread, jerky, a tin of beans. She ate like someone who'd learned food had rules. Never too fast, never too slow, and never asked for more. On the third night, he found her sitting by the horse pen, watching the sky. No stars yet, just the dark rolling in. He gave her a blanket. She didn't move until he turned to go. Then, softly, she laid something in the dirt. A carved bird, wooden, worn, its wings arched in flight. He froze. He'd made one just like it years ago, before the war, for someone he barely remembered anymore. But his fingers remembered every cut of the knife, every groove of its feathered back. He crouched. Where'd you get this? No answer. Just her wide eyes, full of something that made his stomach twist. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. She turned and walked back to the house. He stayed there in the dark long after the wind died. In the weeks that followed, their rhythm settled. Mornings began with coffee and quiet. She followed him from stall to trough to field, never lagging, never speaking. She watched the horses like she knew their hearts. They never spooked around her. Not once. She mimicked his motions, hammering fence nails, sweeping the barn, sorting feed. He started leaving chalk on the table, and she used it. Circles, lines, simple sketches. A sun, a rabbit, a set of footprints leading nowhere. One morning, he heard thunder in the distance. Not loud, not close, but a whisper of it rolling down the hills. The girl flinched. He turned. She hadn't seen him watching. He tested it again that evening, stomped hard on the porch planks behind her. No reaction. But 2 days later, when a distant rider cracked a whip on the road beyond the ridge, she startled before he even heard it. She was pretending. Not fully. Not always. But enough. He didn't confront her. Just started watching closer. Testing. When he dropped a tin spoon by the stove, she caught it before it clanged. When he asked point-blank, "Can you hear me?" she just stared like stone. But sometimes, at night, she'd hum. No sound. Just the motion of lips. Once, beside the fire, he took out an old harmonica. Played something half-remembered from his mother's parlor days. She watched his fingers, not his face. When he stopped, she touched her chest. Then her throat. Then her mouth. It wasn't a question. It was a map. He thought he understood. Then he didn't. Then he realized he didn't need to. Not yet. One afternoon, he came in from the shed and found another carving on the windowsill, beside the bird. A horse this time. Carved in the same crooked style he thought he'd buried with the rest of his past. But he hadn't carved this one. She had. The girl, still with no name, sat nearby with a piece of scrap wood and his old whittling knife. Her hands moved slow, but sure. Like they remembered too. He sat down beside her. Said nothing. After a moment, she handed him the bird again. He turned it over in his palm. Under one wing, carved so faint it was almost gone, was a letter. An initial. His. He stared at her, breath caught. But she just turned back to her work, shaving curls of wood that fell like feathers. Outside, the sky was heavy with the threat of rain, but the wind hadn't yet come. He didn't ask questions. But he knew, as sure as the land knew drought from flood, that something was wrong with the way she looked at him. Not with fear, with memory. And that memory wasn't hers alone. He found her kneeling by the stream, sleeves rolled past her elbows, hands sunk in the cold current like she was feeling for something lost long ago. A curl of her hair stuck to her cheek, wet from the mist that had started to rise with spring. She didn't look up as he approached. She never did unless it mattered. He leaned against a tree and watched her, unsure what to say to someone who wouldn't, or wouldn't yet, speak back. It no longer unsettled him. Silence had stopped being absence. Now it was a language of glances, of pauses held a second too long. Sometimes, he thought her silence was louder than thunder. That day, she held a smooth rock in one hand and began tracing lines in the soft mud. Circles. Waves. An eye. She never drew for beauty. Only meaning. He knelt beside her and pointed to the eye. "Yours," he asked softly. She shook her head, then placed a fingertip on his chest. He felt something shift inside him. That night, he dreamed of fire again. In the dream, the fire didn't burn wood, it burned names. Names he'd been ordered to forget. Villages without maps. Faces without justice. When he woke, sweat slicked his back, and the girl stood at the doorway again, watching him like she always did when the nightmares came. Her small hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white. He sat up and rubbed his face. "You were there, weren't you?" She didn't move. But in the silence, he knew. They didn't speak of it. Instead, he taught her things he'd never taught anyone. How to saddle a horse without waking it. How to taste the air for rain. How to use shadow instead of stepping into sunlight. These weren't chores. These were survival. And she absorbed every detail like a dry field takes water, quick, quiet, and without waste. Sometimes she disappeared for hours, wandering into the low hills beyond the orchard. He didn't stop her. Something in him trusted she'd return. One evening she did, but not alone. A woman came riding behind her. Weathered, lean, older than the desert, with hair streaked silver and black. She dismounted like someone who'd done it 10,000 times. The girl walked beside her with a strange calm, like she already knew this wasn't someone to fear. The rancher stepped out of the barn, rifle in hand but lowered. He looked at the stranger, and the stranger looked back with eyes that had seen too much to be startled. "I ain't here to cause harm," she said, voice dry and low like riverbed gravel. Came because I was called. He said nothing, just waited. She turned to the girl and placed a hand on her shoulder. She's not deaf, she said simply. She hears what most folk forget to listen for. That's how she survived. The rancher's jaw worked. She never said. She learned early not to trust sound. Words are lies. Steps are traps. But she hears the bones of things. Heard you before you ever spoke. He stared at the girl, but she kept her eyes down. The woman looked past him, toward the house. This place reeks of ghosts. Yours, hers, and something older. Who are you? He asked finally. Someone who helps those caught between two names. Before he could speak again, she pressed a leather pouch into his hands. Inside, dried herbs, bone beads, 2 silver bullets, carved with runes he couldn't read. She's hunted, the woman said. Not by chance. By blood. Then she left, riding east as the sun bled down the horizon. He watched her go, then turned to the girl. She drew a mark in the dirt with her toe. A curved X inside a circle. It froze his breath. He knew that symbol. He'd seen it once, branded onto the chest of a dying Apache boy during a raid his unit had been ordered to carry out. It wasn't just a tribal symbol. It was a warning. This one was not meant to die alone. He realized something then. The past hadn't come back by chance. It had followed her. Or maybe followed him. She knew. The girl knew who he was. Not the man who patched fences and fed horses, but the man he'd been when he wore the uniform. She'd seen him before. Or someone like him. She had kept that inside her all this time, carving wooden birds with hands that remembered things her mouth never said. He didn't sleep that night. The wind rattled the shutters, and coyotes yipped far off in the dark. He poured coffee he didn't drink, stared into a fire that didn't warm him. When dawn crept through the window, she was already outside. He watched her crouch in the field, one hand pressed to the earth. She stood suddenly and turned to him, lifting her arm. In her hand, clenched tight, was a bullet. He crossed the field fast, took it from her palm. It wasn't his. Too new, too clean, recently dropped. Someone had been near the ranch. She pointed to the hills. Someone was watching. He gripped the bullet until his hand ached. She didn't tremble, didn't flinch, just looked at him, eyes filled with something he couldn't bear, trust. Not the blind kind. The kind that dares you to become the man someone already believes you are. He nodded once. I'll fix this. She didn't smile, just stood a little taller. And for the first time, he thought he heard something real in the silence between them. A promise. The sound came just before dawn. A faint metallic click, too deliberate to be an animal. The rancher was already awake. Sleep had long ago become a luxury he couldn't afford, especially now. He rolled from bed, boots on in seconds, rifle in hand. The house held its breath. Outside, the frost had kissed the ground silver, and a fine mist hung in the hollows like breath not yet spoken. He found her already in the hallway, bare feet quiet on the wood. She didn't look frightened, just alert, as if some buried part of her had heard that sound all her life. She raised 2 fingers, then pointed toward the barn. He nodded, his heartbeat steady in the way it only got when he was seconds from something irreversible. They moved together without speaking. A side door creaked low as they slipped out. The horizon held only the first blush of pink, but the light was enough to see the boot prints in the frost. Fresh. Too heavy for a drifter. Too close for comfort. The rancher knelt beside the prints. Wide heel. Deep arch military or bounty. Not the kind of man who misses when he aims. She crouched beside him and traced a finger beside one boot mark, then tapped her palm twice. 2 men. One scout, one close. He didn't ask how she knew. He believed her now the way a man believes the first tremor before an earthquake. Instinct deeper than thought. The barn was dark inside. He motioned for her to stay behind him, but she ignored him, slipping low against the wall like a shadow. A sliver of moonlight poured through a broken board, just enough to catch the shape of a boot moving behind the feed sacks. He raised the rifle. Step out slow. Silence. Then the figure rose. Tall, unshaven, face half hidden beneath a hat soaked in night sweat. But the eyes, those weren't the eyes of a man surprised. "You got something don't belong to you," the stranger said. Voice dry. Accent southern, old trail war. "Wrong place," the rancher answered. "I ain't here for you. She's under my roof." She was under someone else's roof first. The girl appeared behind the stranger, knife in hand, movement ghost quiet. But the stranger turned just in time, and in that blur of motion, the rancher didn't think, he fired. The blast knocked the silence sideways. The man crumpled in place. The girl didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on the body. Blood pooled. Steam rose from it in the cold. The rancher lowered the rifle and stepped forward. No badge. No papers. But under the stranger's coat, he found a red sash. He hadn't seen one in years. It marked him as kin to the Red Sigil, a militia splinter born from war, a brotherhood of deserters and bounty men who made their fortune stealing children from border towns and selling them to ranches, mines, brothels. He thought they were long gone. Apparently not. The girl touched the sash and then pressed it into the fire pit, where it curled and blackened without sound. They buried the man before noon. No words, just dirt and wind. Afterward, he walked the fence line, checking for signs. The second man was still out there. He could feel it like a weight in his chest. That night, he boarded the windows, lit a lamp in every room. The girl sat on the porch, legs tucked beneath her, carving again. This time, not a bird or horse. A man, hollow-eyed, hat low, rifle on his back. She held it out to him when he passed. He took it, thumb running across the grain. It was him, weathered and watchful. "I wasn't always a good man," he said. She tilted her head. He nodded toward the hills. "The men who are coming might not stop." She pointed to herself, then the house, then the carving. They wouldn't take it again. Not the silence, not the safety. Not what they'd built between the cracks of old sin. The next day, he taught her how to fire the rifle. She braced it like she'd watched him for months, arms firm, breath steady. The shot rang out clean across the field. After 3 tries, she hit the post. He said nothing, just handed her the box of shells. They trained like that for 2 more days. Quiet, steady, under the open sky. She never asked questions, never boasted when she improved. But something opened in her. Not a smile. Not exactly. But a lightness around the shoulders, like the weight had shifted from survival to purpose. On the 3rd evening, they spotted smoke on the ridgeline. 1 campfire. He counted the minutes it took to rise. Too confident for a drifter. Not cautious enough for someone passing through. He saddled the horses before dawn. They didn't ride far, just to the edge of the property, where the ash still warmed the air. Boot prints again. 2 pairs. 1 heavy, 1 lighter. Different tread than the dead man. He followed them to the edge of a bluff, where they vanished into hard stone. But on the flat rock, carved deep with something sharp, was the symbol again. The circle. The X. But now it bled outward, lines like sun rays or veins. A warning. Or a map. He traced it with his hand, then looked out across the plain. The girl stood behind him, hair lifting in the morning breeze. When he turned to her, there was a calm in her he hadn't seen before. Not fear. Not even resolve. Faith. Not in him, exactly. But in what they were together. In what they could face. He looked back to the horizon. The storm hadn't broken yet. But it would. And they would meet it together. The horses were restless that night. Snorting in their stalls. Hooves shifting on dry wood. A storm wasn't coming, not one with clouds. But something else pressed in from the edges of the land. The kind of weight that made animals wild and children silent. The girl felt it too. She stood in the doorway long after the oil lamps had been snuffed out, her eyes trained on the dark hills like she could see beyond them. He sat at the table, rifle across his knees. A candle burned low beside a tin cup of untouched coffee. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that held its breath before a scream. He finally spoke, voice rasped from smoke and memory. "They're not coming for you anymore." She turned slowly. "They're coming for me." You were just the excuse. She crossed the room, bare feet soft on the wood. She stopped in front of him and placed something in his hands. A folded square of hide. Inside, a single black feather. He looked up at her. She nodded once. Forgiveness. He swallowed hard. The past had a way of finding men like him, no matter how deep they buried it beneath fence posts and firewood. And this time, it had come armed. Just before dawn, he spotted movement at the edge of the southern ridge. A glint off steel. Not carelessness, taunting. These men weren't trackers. They were hunters, certain of their prey. He rode out alone. She wanted to come. But he made her swear, by the bird she carved and the stories she carried, that she would stay hidden if he didn't return. She didn't speak. She just watched him ride into the mist like a ghost heading home. The ridge was empty when he arrived. But not still. Something watched him from the trees. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching dry grass. The air held the taste of rust. Then the voice came, low, smooth, coiled with venom. Took us a while to find you. He didn't turn. Figured you might. A man stepped out. Broad. Long coat. Eyes the color of stone turned to ash. Not red sigil. Older. Smarter. Worse. We've been following her since the river town, the man said. Didn't think we'd find the butcher of Painted Rock playing rancher. The rancher's jaw clenched. That name died years ago. The man grinned. Funny thing about names. They don't stay buried. Especially not when you leave survivors. More emerged from the trees. 4, maybe 5, each armed, each with eyes like hollow drums. The leader stepped closer. She's one of ours. Blood price was paid. She ran. She wasn't yours to sell. She ain't yours to keep. The rifle came up fast. He fired once, took the lead man through the shoulder. Then the bluff erupted. Gunfire tore the quiet to shreds. Horses screamed in the valley below. The rancher ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding, counting the bullets left in the chamber. Not enough. He took 2 more shots. One missed. One clipped a man's leg. But they were spreading out, surrounding. He thought of her, small hands, quiet steps, the way she looked at fire like it told her secrets. He wasn't going to die on a ridge. Not for a past he didn't choose. He dropped low and rolled, grabbing the fallen man's revolver. As he rose, a shadow lunged, knife outstretched. A shot rang out. Not his. The man crumpled, mid-step. He turned. She stood at the bluff's edge, breath heaving, the rifle clutched in both hands. Her eyes were wild, not with fear, but fury. The carved feather hung from her neck, swinging like a pendulum. He opened his mouth to shout, to tell her to run, but she was already moving. Fast. Sharp. She knew this land better than they did. She vanished between rocks and scrub, reappearing behind one of the gunmen. Another shot. He took the opening. Steel. Smoke. Screams. When it was over, only the wind moved. Blood soaked the stones. The girl stood still, rifle at her side, jaw tight. He limped to her, hand reaching gently for her shoulder. You shouldn't have come. She looked up, eyes shining. I told you to stay. She pressed a finger to his lips. Then she handed him a small bundle, wrapped in cloth. Inside were papers, letters, names, proof. The men who'd come weren't after her alone. They were after land, after secrets buried deep in military reports and forgotten graves. She'd known. She'd heard it in the silence between words. He lowered the bundle and looked out over the hills, the wind brushing his face like a memory. We end this, he said. She nodded. They buried the dead beneath unmarked stones, burned what they couldn't bury. And when the next dawn came, it didn't rise quiet, it rose fierce, with color so deep it looked like the land was bleeding out its sins. She stood beside him, hair tangled in the wind, eyes fixed westward. He took her hand. She didn't flinch. They weren't father and daughter, weren't blood, weren't even a proper family by law or land. But they were something stronger, chosen. The ghost didn't leave them, not completely. But that morning, for the first time, they stood behind, not in front. And far off in the distance, where the sky bent low, a hawk circled. Alone. but never again unheard.